Farmer. I'm an associate professor of history here. I'm going to be talking as part of the panel, but also being the chair and the commentator and facilitator. So what I think is best to do is if we introduce each paper as it comes up. This is going to be a little bit more of an informal panel. We're going to have a few kind of talks, but it's going to be mainly images and discussions and a little bit of back and forth. So our panel this afternoon then is called Designing Public History, Faculty, Student and Community Perspectives. And so we're going to start with myself and John Farmer talking to you about this project, the faculty perspective, connecting historians and designers through community partnership projects. So that panel makes sense because I'm an associate professor of history and you are?
I'm a visiting assistant professor of graphic design.
Yeah, and John is also my husband, so he kind of gets roped into these projects when I was like, I've got an idea for a project, can we connect my students and your students? So that's what we're going to talk to you a little bit about. In the first thing, like, you know, as an undergraduate historian, like, why would it make sense if you have to collaborate on projects with graphic design majors? So you can see some of like our cool students in front of you and also on the slide here. So we're going to talk to you about a few examples of that from a faculty perspective. Then we're going to hear a little bit from like, what is it like to be a history major at Roger Williams and do some of this kind of public history, this experiential learning. And then we're going to hand over to Dave, who is behind the camera right now, who's going to talk to you about this from a community partner perspective. So one of the really cool things that makes my job really easy and exciting is the fact that Roger Williams University has a dedicated community partnership centre that just basically started as I took this job 7 years ago. So it was an amazing twist of fate that our former president, who sadly passed away last year, President Farish, really did believe in experiential learning and really did believe in kind of putting his money where his mouth was at and founded this community partnership centre. So you can see the mission on here, and I'm actually just going to take the time to read this, and the bold is mine, right? Like I've added that bold to the mission statement. So it says, the Roger Williams University Community Partnership Centre's mission is to undertake and complete projects that will benefit local communities within Rhode Island and the southeastern Massachusetts, whilst providing RWU students with experience in real-world projects that deepen their academic experiences. And we'll be hearing whether that's true in a minute. The CPC provides RWU students at the undergraduate, which is what we're going to hear today, and graduate levels with meaningful project-based education experiences which address real community needs. These projects provide real-world experience that is integrated with their growth as scholars and future practitioners. Furthermore, community partnerships broaden and deepen the academic experiences of RWU students by allowing them to work on real-world projects through curriculum-based and service learning opportunities, collaborating with non-profit and community leaders as they seek to achieve their missions. The services provided by the CPC would normally not be available to these organisations due to their cost and or diverse needs. So, you know, it works both ways, right? It's a reciprocal thing. Our students get this hands-on real-world experience, and our community partners basically get free labour and enthusiastic students most of the time. And so that's a mission of this. So this is just a few of the statistics from last year. So you can see that the Community Partnership Centre has had all these hours that our students have volunteered on all of these projects, right? That's slightly out of date. I think we're closer to over 300 right now, right? I've not seen the latest one. And so we see all the students involved. We have each incoming class of freshman students is around 1,000-ish students at the undergraduate level. So, you know, a big chunk of our students at some point during their time at Roger Williams will get involved in the Community Partnership Centre. So I'm going to hand over to John for a minute to talk a little bit about some of the graphic design projects that he's led that have had some connection to history. And then I'm going to come and talk again a bit about specific collaborations that we've had. So do you want to talk to like historians about why graphic designers are really necessary as we do history projects? Like, what do you want to talk about these projects?
Okay. So I can understand that, you know, coming from a graphic design standpoint, is that maybe that's
there's no real connection to history, but from our department, from the graphic design department, is that we're trying to form connections with that of the history department so we can visually represent, you know, sort of historical research, historical backgrounds. Okay, we kind of want to make history open to the general public. Okay, so through the CPC, through the Community Partnership Centre, is that we've, over the past 2 years, is that I've done numerous projects through the CPC with local non-profit organisations. So one of the projects that we did was working with Roger Williams Park, and they wanted to promote the Betsy Williams Cottage, which was a descendant of Roger Williams who donated the land to the government, to Roger Williams Park, to set up the park. And we did all their kind of signage, all their promotional things. So in the next, I don't know, 6 to 12 months, is that's going to be put out to the local populace, right? So the promotion of this, it's a tiny little cottage. I don't know if you've ever been to Roger Williams Park. It's a tiny little cottage right in the centre of the park there. And it was just a way for my students, my graphic design students, to look at historical backgrounds and the historiography of that of the park. It was just a really good project through the CPC. This is why the CPC Centre is a really important thing on campus. And it's not just other history projects, it's graphic design projects, it's architectural projects, it's heritage conservation projects. You know, so when we looked at the statistic beforehand and we looked at how many projects we've done through the CPC Centre, is that it's a wide variety of projects we did. Another project that we did was Central Falls, so it was the rebranding of the city of Central Falls. So again, my students did all the rebranding of the city itself, looking at like the signage of the local parks, and there's a memorial there for the King Philip's Wall. And we wanted to use our kind of graphic design skill to best kind of promote that and represent that, you know, as a form of local history. You know, really important part of local history is the King Philip's War Memorial, and my students kind of promoted that. We are doing this in reference to the history students as well, because my graphic design students, maybe their focus is on other things. So we are being cross-collaborative, you know, throughout that process. And then one of the recent projects that we did, it was the 100th year celebration of the Rhode Island chapter of the Red Cross. That's a bit of a mouthful, I do understand. So we did a travelling exhibition of their work. So this is my students here. So we had a day at their main office in Providence, and we got to kind of look at all their archives and look at like old uniforms, or, you know, all this kind of stuff. And not being a historian, and my students not being historians, it was a really good cross-collaborative project to do, because we got really excited about seeing this stuff that you can actually touch and feel, something that's tangible. It really affected my students, you know, to produce this kind of project. This was something, it was a travelling exhibition that went round the whole of Rhode Island. We went to the State House, it was over on Block Island and Nantucket, and all these places, and it was featured on WPRI, so we got some exposure through the local news network. And it was just a really good project. So the CPC here on campus is just really, really important for students to do this experiential learning and cross-collaborative projects. Okay, so that's just kind of like a brief overview of what I've done with my graphic design students, okay, through the CPC. Okay, working in conjunction, hopefully, with Sean.
Yeah, I'll switch it over.
Yeah,
it's cool. So one of the things that I've realised as a historian is how often, like, graphic designers just do stuff and they have no historic knowledge. Like, this project made me super nervous.
Shall I just sit back down again then?
You should sit back down. No, it's easy. But like, this project made me really nervous, and this one too. this project came through the graphic design department. They were like, we want to put some signs up for the battle that took place up in Central Falls and like the Nine Mounds Misery, and we want to put that up there. The graphic designers are going to do that. I'm like, no, no they're not. Like my historians are going to do some of the research and they're going to tell them like what should go on the sign. So sometimes the community partners come from like the city or the Red Cross, and they know that it's the ultimate thing will be a website or a sign, and so that's graphic design. But you know, being married to John, I basically use my leverage as a wife rather than as a faculty member to kind of intervene on these. So I think again, like that really matters that as undergraduate students that they can collaborate with different majors. I think graphic design is a really good example. Kind of unintended at times. And this is a King Philip's War one that we're talking about. So this was a couple of years ago when I taught my Face in East from Indian Country a Native History of America class. I've taught this class several times, and you've all taken that at different times, right? And each time is kind of different. And so the first time I taught it, we did this project with Central Falls, and so we got to go and like explore some of the sites, like take seriously some of the oral histories, collaborate with Park Ranger John McNiff on this to kind of do some of the history research to pass on to you guys to create the signs. So it's really exciting. Like I really do love being able to do that. The thing I want to spend, I'm just mindful of the clock, the thing I want to talk to you about that's really kind of transformed our experience, I think, in the past couple of years is a big donation that the university received from the Hassenfeld family. And so both John and I were faculty fellows for the Hassenfeld, and we're going to hear from the students about some fellowships they've held, so I'm going to let them speak for themselves. I'll speak to the faculty perspective. So in 2016 we got this huge grant, right, from the Hassenfeld family, basically to establish within the Community Partnership Centre particular projects that are going to have Hassenfeld money thrown at them. And so there were student and faculty fellowships, and John and I were lucky enough to get the fellowships. I got the Advanced Fellowship, which meant it basically came with a publication expectation at the end, which is forthcoming. And John's Intermediate Fellowship meant that you had to share stuff at a regional conference and present on campus. So we decided together that we would do something that's been on my mind since I took this job, right? I've been thinking about Roger Williams, the man, since I was an undergraduate student in England. You know, I wrote my undergraduate history senior thesis back across the pond in 2002, 2003 on Roger Williams. And so he's been on my mind for a long time, and so it was, anyway, kind of divine intervention that I got this job. And one of the things that really irked me when I walked onto campus was the kind of naff statues that we have of Roger. You know, we have no idea what Roger looked like. He never sat for a portrait. He wanted to be remembered for his words and his ideas and his actions. So I wanted to really bring that to campus to think about how we remember Roger Williams, the man. So when we got this Hassenfeld money, John and I decided to partner up on something about like reading and writing and remembering Roger, like all of the alliteration of Roger, I guess. And so we partnered with Rhode Island Historical Society and Roger Williams National Memorial on this idea to try and remember Roger Williams for more of his words and his ideas. This came about at the perfect time because we had a new Dean for General Education, Jason Jacobs, who wanted to pilot a first-year seminar across the core curriculum that centered Roger Williams. So we started, and Charlie's part of this program too, we started out a couple of years ago with like, what was it, a quarter of the freshman class taking a Roger seminar, then we moved to half of the freshman class, and for the past 2 years every incoming freshman has taken a Roger seminar. And 3 of the students here have taken that seminar and they're going to speak about the student experience. And so it was kind of perfect timing, right? We got this money from the Hassenfeld, all of our incoming freshmen were doing something about Roger Williams, and I had this book, like this chip on my shoulder about, you know, remembering Roger for his words and his ideas. So what we decided to do was, partnering with the Rhode Island Historical Society and the National Memorial, was to work as incoming freshman students, not history majors, just incoming freshmen in the Roger seminar, to read through original documents by Roger Williams, so his letters and his published work, to figure out what the most important things that Roger ever said that we should really center on, and to do a typography exhibit on that. So to kind of counter, but the particularly bad statue of Roger, if you go into our library, right? You know, there's all stuff about like, it's based on Ted Williams' the baseball player. So to think carefully about how we remember Roger. So it was my students' job to basically pick out from all of these like handwritten documents and 17th century type documents, what were the important things that Roger ever said or wrote, and then to hand that over to someone who could do something cool with that. And this is where John's students came in. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about the launch event, and I'm going to hand back over to you. So to tie into this then, we had this huge launch event. We've actually had two events tied to it. The big launch event was reading Roger Williams, and so Rhode Island Historical Society let us borrow for like a couple of hours an original letter by Roger Williams, and then the second time we did this, they let us have his compass, right? So they allowed us to bring these tangible artifacts to campus and to have this huge paleography transcription party. I'm going to say it's a party, right? There was food after, so we'll say it was a party. And we were able to bring in Julie Fisher from the American Philosophical Association to come and run a Reading Roger Williams transcription competition, and some of the students are going to talk a little bit more about that later. And so we had this huge launch event that was thinking more about Roger for what he wrote, for what he said, rather than the statues that we have to him on campus. So we had this huge transcription workshop. We had letters on display, and then we, again, like trying to think about experiential learning, we brought in Park Ranger John McNiff to come and do like how to write like in the 17th century. The second time we did this, we did a folding workshop. We brought a scholar from the Beinecke at Yale to come and talk to us about like if you wrote a letter in the 17th century, and we all did practice letters, like how would you fold that and send that? Like what techniques would you use to send a letter in the 17th century? Like how would you like make your rubber stamp? So it was more, it wasn't just about like remembering Roger for his words, it was about trying to bring the 17th century history to life and to partner with both Rhode Island Historical Society and the Roger Williams National Memorial. So again, like you see a couple of the in-action shots. So here's Sam and Danny in front of you and on the screen doing this online transcription. So Julie Fisher, who you see here, had done high-res scans of the letters, and using an online resource called Dromino, they were able to do this transcription kind of simultaneously. Here's Roger Williams' compass, and here's our former provost coming to look at that. So it was a great way to get the administration excited about this local history project. And here's a couple of our, they were freshmen then, they're not freshmen now, doing the writing with a quill workshop before they go over here to learn how to fold their letter. So it was a super cool kind of launch event for the main stuff, which you can kind of see in the background. So here are some of the posters that John's students did. So we gave them, during the semester, my students read a lot of original 17th century stuff that Roger said and said, these are the 10 top things that everyone should know that Roger says or writes or whatever. And we gave them to you to do something cool with. And so you can see a couple of these posters like in the background, like on display here. And I'm going to let John talk about the posters in 1 second. What I want to say though is that this went like beyond our wildest dreams. Like the next day I got a call like, you're on the front page of the Projo, and I was like, this is it, I should just retire now, right? It never gets any better than this. But the Projo, and I think this is because we had Ed Fitzpatrick working for the university, who pulled some strings for us. I'm not asking any questions. But we made the front page of this, so it really did show that the work that students were doing, the stuff that we were doing, and an amazing community partnership with the National Memorial and Rhode Island Historical Society, did capture this wider public interest. So you can see the students doing the writing with a quill with Park Ranger McNiff. Here's a compass on, here's a lecture on display, and like this is like the Sam and Danny show. Like they're right up here doing the paleography stuff. So again, like as a faculty member, like that's what you want to be in the newspaper for, right? Like some of you were in the session with me earlier, and I was talking about the Columbus Day controversy and one of our donors. That's not what you want the spotlight on you for. This is what you want the spotlight on you for. So I'll hand over to John to talk a little bit. We've got a couple of pictures that you can talk about, John, from your perspective. You can see some of the student posters.
Yeah, very kind of briefly. This was, again, what Charlotte's been talking about is this cross-collaborative projects that we're working with the history students and the history department within my department, the graphic design department, making history hopefully accessible to the general public. And this project was done with my Intro to Design Communication students. So this is a 100 level class. This was like within the first 2 months of them having anything to do with graphic design. And I thought we thought that it would be a good idea to do that cross collaboration where we're looking at the writings and the words of Roger Williams. So like what Charlotte was saying is, and maybe you all know that like the visual representation of Roger Williams is not his true likeness, okay? So it's not him. But we wanted just to represent his words. If he wanted his words to be remembered, then we wanted to do something that could access the general public to his work, to his writing. And we just did these kind of like typographic posters, right? So, typography is a separate kind of style, a separate genre within graphic design. It's a very important practice within the field of graphic design. A good use and understanding of typography is very important. So, being that we connected it to the words of Roger Williams, I think it gave it extra emphasis, on the establishment where they are, obviously where they're studying, and the kind of style of typography that they've been using also. So these are just some examples of the work that we did, and it was just a really effective project for the students to do. I think we got a lot from it, especially with the fact that it was actually on display. It's put on display in the library here, then over at the Roger Williams Park.
Still on display now.
National Memorial display. So there's other kind of visual representations of his words. Just trying to get more access from sort of the general populace.
Yeah, so this is really cool. I just want to talk a little bit about this. So I really love this as a historian, right? One of the things that I've been really keen to do, and I'm mindful of being the chair now, I'm not presenting, I'm being mindful of keeping an eye on the time, so we'll wrap up in a minute, is when the incoming freshmen do the Roger seminar, it's not just hero worship, right? We think really critically about Roger Williams, and one of the things is acknowledging that he traded slaves, right? Like he enslaved indigenous peoples in 1676. So I really love what John Student did here, because the background, and you can't see this too well, but the background, like handwritten stuff here, is Roger's letter enslaving indigenous peoples, where he signs first and foremost, overlaid with that lovely quote that we all like to say to Roger. He says, boast not proud English of thy birth and blood, thy brother Indian is by birth as good. So on the top of this, right, we've got this is a historian trying to analyse their typography. Like we've got this lovely quote that Roger says that, we're all about diversity and equality, and it's great, but it's overlaid with this handwritten where he writes first that he's going to enslave indigenous people. So again, like not only just talking about Roger Williams, but using typography as a way to have complicated conversations about Roger Williams. So what we'll do then is we'll wrap up there a little bit, and what we'll do is we'll make sure we've got plenty of time for questions. So I have plenty of other specific history projects that I can talk to you about if you want to know more about that. But what we'll do is we'll save the questions for the end, if that's okay. And we'll now transition into the student perspective. So it really is my real pleasure and privilege to introduce some of my amazing current students and one of my former brilliant students who graduated last year. So we'll start at do you want to stand up, Rebecca? This is Rebecca Farias. Rebecca's a senior history major. She's going to talk to you about her experiences. Do you want to kind of come next, Sam? You're on my list. Yeah, this is Sandra Rocha. She's a senior. She is about to graduate too. We're going to use these 3 brilliant students this summer. Sam's a double major with history and legal studies. And then Danny Perkins, history ed double major. So I'm really interested in what Danny's going to talk to you about, what that means to be history ed double major, thinking about some of the conversations that we had earlier on about education. And then last but not least, this is Carolyn Westgate. Carolyn was a history major with education who graduated last year. And so she's going to talk to you a little bit about teaching history and one of the Hassenfeld fellowships that she got. So shall we just transition into handing over to you? I know you guys have got to come and set up PowerPoint, if that's okay. Who is give you the official student panel title? It's Student Perspective, Experiential Learning in the History Department. So each of the students and former students are going to give you a brief 5-minute snapshot of some of the cool experiential learning that they've done. Oh, it worked.
Farmer was talking about, and my project was entitled Transatlantic Teaching, Global Perspectives in the Classroom. So this project focused on the Ripley Academy in the United Kingdom, and we had a very unique connection because Dr. Karen Farmer was a student there.
So was John.
And,
So was
you
I,
were?
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So this school reached out looking for an opportunity to engage students in a different way. And Dr. Karen Farmer approached me because we thought it would be a great experience for me and for the students, and it definitely was. So I'll talk a little bit more about what we did together. So it was through the Hasselfeld Fellowship, and this was great because not only did it give funding, but it also gave a lot of support to me. They do a lot of professional development for students, so there's a lot of resources there, constantly doing resume workshops and things like that. So it was a really great experience, and I did it for 2 years. And this is what we did together. So we would do these lessons often, and we just kind of did it, and we didn't know how it would go, and it ended up working out really well. So the students were really engaged. It was great for me to get practice as a developing teacher in just creating lessons, seeing how students respond to them. But there were a lot of things that I had to consider that I would not have had to consider at a classroom here in the US. So thinking about how the curriculum is different, it brought a whole new challenge to me. They were learning things that I had no idea about. I ended up teaching a lesson about the Boer War, which I don't think I ever heard about before this. I had to think about student age, so schools are set up very differently than they are here. I was teaching kids that were 9 and then kids that were 18 in the next day, which is very different. And just thinking about student background knowledge and vocabulary. I taught a lesson one time about Roger Williams and kind of noticed throughout there that they weren't very familiar with Native Americans, which is something that I should have considered. And it's also it was a unique challenge for us, I think, in terms of technology and the limitations of video chat, but throughout the whole way, I was becoming a stronger teacher, becoming flexible, becoming, just being able to work with colleagues, I guess, to overcome those challenges. And one of the lessons that I did was on Roger Williams, and this has kind of become a focus, I guess, for me as a teacher. So I'm always looking for ways to go out of the curriculum, and I have to share a funny story. My school is really focused on this new social studies curriculum that we have, and they're really in a rush with it. And with the Columbus Day, I was like, well, I need to do a lesson on Columbus. But I didn't really want anyone to know that I was going to do it, so I was just going to do it with my students. And it was the Tuesday after Columbus Day, and my whole administration team came in and said, we're here to observe you. And I was like, that is lovely. So I just did it, and I was like, we'll see what's going to happen. And they loved it. So it all worked out in the end. But it has shown me that there are ways to tie back into what you need to talk about using these anecdotal stories and always having the truth about history wherever you go. This is a video clip of me teaching, but I'm not gonna do it. I don't know if it's gonna work, so I just don't want to spare you that. And here's the why behind our whole project, and really what inspired me as a student. Learning from differences in educational systems in different countries was great. Just connecting classrooms, so the whole purpose of it was to eventually connect my students with those students, and we're still working on steps to do that. I am a teacher currently, so that is possible in the near future. And it's also using the study of history to connect the world. So talking about Roger Williams from both sides of the Atlantic, and also just getting perspective on different issues like the American Revolution was really great. And just using the world to engage and excite students. So that's really why I have that double passion of history and education. And with the help of Dr. Karen Farmer and the Hasselfeld Fellowship, I was able to visit the school. I spent 1 week there. Dr. Karen Farmer's family took great care of me. And I was able to visit the school and really get a feel for what was going on, and it was an experience that I will never forget, and I'm a better teacher for it. And beyond the university, I also direct a summer camp at Mount Hope Farm, and I really make it a point to incorporate the Indigenous people into our curriculum. So here is a video of some of my campers doing a friendship dance at King Philip Seats. So that's just a little bit. But I really make it a point to always acknowledge whatever type of history is around me, whatever I'm doing. And currently I'm a teacher in New Bedford at Roosevelt Middle School, so I am trying to incorporate local history, being mindful of where we are, being mindful of stepping out of the textbook and all of that good stuff. But I think all of my experiences here for the teacher that I am today and the faculty support that I had made everything possible, and that's what's really special about Roger Williams, I think. And that is all I have.
Carolyn's last slide ties directly to some of the stuff that Dave's going to talk about with his connection with the SOAMS project and particularly with the Pokanoket. Excellent. Do you want to transition? Do you have a preference about, I'm just looking at the thing. Rebecca, it looks like you might be next. Does that work? Yeah, I think that works quite nicely.
Can I stand here? No, that's going to be
No, it's not annoying at all. Go ahead.
Okay. So my name is Rebecca Farias. I'm a senior and I'm also a history major at Roger Williams. So a few months ago, I found myself in a situation that I'm sure many of you have experienced before. So I was sitting across the dinner table from two computer scientists, and an accountant and a medical student. And one of the scientists asked me what my major was, and I replied with the appropriate level of wariness, "I'm a history major." After an awkward pause, he asked me the question every history major has come to expect, but nobody wants to hear. So what are you going to do with that after you graduate? And I held my breath. I could either say, I don't know yet, or I could describe the many career paths I could pursue with a history degree. But instead, I decided to tell him what I've been working on for the past 4 years with the RWU History Department. So after describing just a few examples of my primary source research, interactive trips, and community engagement both inside and outside the classroom, the whole room was so impressed that they forgot to judge me for majoring in the humanities instead of STEM. In all seriousness, as I look back on my college education so far, I'm happy to say that I'm more than prepared for whatever field of historical study I decide to pursue. I am so proud of what I have accomplished so far, and I am honored to tell you about it today as my first time speaking on a panel. I would like to focus on my long relationship with studying Roger Williams the man in different contexts and settings, and how this has helped me grow as a historian. So one of the best memories I have from freshman year is our Core 102 Challenges of Democracy class, which is also called the Roger Seminar class. So coming to Roger Williams University, especially as a history major and as a Rhode Island resident, I was embarrassed to admit that I didn't actually know much about our namesake. But we didn't just learn about Roger by studying his writings. So Dr. Carrington Farmer teamed up with the Roger Williams National Memorial in Providence, which we talked about previously, which teaches visitors about Roger's 1636 founding of Providence and connects his ideology of freedom of conscience and soul liberty to the present day. So we didn't just tour the city, we experienced it through a historical lens. We immersed ourselves in primary sources by viewing the original charter for the Rhode Island colony and an original copy of The Key into the Language of America, Roger's book about Algonquian indigenous culture. So as you can see, this is a picture of us looking at an original copy of The Key to the Language of America, which is extremely rare and was a really cool opportunity for us.
This is you, right, Rebecca, and it sounds next to you, is
Yep.
that right?
Yeah. There's a lot of repeat in the people in these pictures. It's a small group. But, you can flip to the next picture. And it's just like a general picture of us. That's Park Ranger John McNiff. You might be that's Dan, I think. This is us outside the National Memorial. So that day that we went to the memorial, I realized the importance of reading primary sources in their original form. But I also realized that my passion for history could help me preserve the cultural legacy of people like Roger Williams. So this fascination with Roger and all things colonial America followed me to my junior year of college. So for my writing minor, I took an introductory grant writing class. So over the course of the semester, we would research, conduct interviews, and eventually write our own grant. So we had the option of submitting our grants to the University Provost Fund, where the grant would be funded. The grant had to focus on experiential learning, which, as we said before, is part of Roger Williams' mission as a university. So around the same time, I received a life-changing opportunity. I was accepted into the Retracing Roger Study Abroad, which is the same trip that Carolyn went on, which is a week-long spring trip to London and Cambridge that retraces the early life of Roger Williams. So the trip is traditionally for first-year students taking the Roger Seminar, but since I hadn't been able to go my freshman year, Dr. Carrington Farmer generously let me apply, and I was accepted. So I even received the Bridging the World Scholarship, which helped me defray the cost. I was very nervous for my first flight out of the country, but it helped that I was traveling with a small group of students with Dr. Carrington Farmer and with Park Ranger John McNiff from the Roger Williams National Memorial. Okay. So once in London, I was thrilled to start pursuing our packed historical itinerary. The best part of the trip was I got to travel with these experts who took us deep into the living history of London and Cambridge, and they explained things that I never would have found out on my own. So we visited St. Paul's Cathedral and the ornate 100-foot whispering wall of the inner dome, but we also saw the All Saints High Laver Church, which is the chapel in the Cambridge countryside where Roger Williams was married. And I believe if you flip to the next picture, yeah, so this is us outside the church, and this is also where John Locke was buried, so I thought that was pretty cool.
Just to clarify, this is Essex.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's cool. It's right within the area of Cambridge.
It's like a small
town. Yeah, High Laver is the town, Essex is the county.
So my favorite part, I don't have a picture of it here, but was visiting the Tower of London, where we got to meet the ravens, and one of our group was bitten by one of the ravens because they're kind of tame.
That was not my favorite bit as faculty.
I mean, the biting wasn't my favorite part, but, and I also got to see King Henry VIII's armor and his horse's armor, which I thought was pretty cool. The best part about the trip was seeing the artifacts and the primary sources I had learned about since middle school. So Magna Carta, the crown jewels, and even an impressive collection of mummies. So it really helped me feel an emotional connection to the people of the past, which I wouldn't have otherwise gotten had I not gone on the trip. So I also got to experience history and modern English culture firsthand, and that's all because of the history department. So before I went on the trip, and after I'd been accepted, I still had to come up with an idea for my grant. So of course I wanted to do something to benefit the history department, but I wasn't sure what to write about. So then it came to me. The Retracing Roger trip focused exclusively on Roger Williams before he came to the New World. So I was thinking, what if I could help the trip participants understand what it was like for Roger to give up that life of luxury to come all the way to Rhode Island, which would have been a wilderness at the time. So the closest thing that I could think of that would recreate that kind of environment was Plymouth Plantation. So I came to the idea that I would like to host a one-night, two-day overnight trip to Plymouth Plantation. The proposed trip would be the epitome of experiential learning because students would learn from the perspectives of colonists and Native Americans. They would participate in educational activities, and they would experience the settlement after dark, which is a rare opportunity. I decided to offer the trip to members of the Retracing Roger Study Abroad to help them experience come full circle, but eventually we expanded it to history majors and anyone who was interested. So the grant was funded and approved, and a few months after I returned from England, a group of students, some of whom had gone on the England trip, Dr. Carrington Farmer, Ranger McNiff, and I embarked for Plymouth Plantation. So you can switch to the next picture. So the trip was unique because we learned from, that's Dan. We learned from both the colonial and Wampanoag indigenous mindset. We had representatives for each culture teach us different activities. So in the fort, we learned to manage weapons and charge holding giant metal pikes, which was cool because they were like 9 feet tall.
It was really hard.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. That was scary. So in the We-Two, which you can change to the next slide, we sat on furs at night, which was also really cool, and gathered around a fire to listen to traditional stories and recipes. So we also had a traditional turkey dinner with food from both cultures, and we slept in the brand new internship housing. I'm so thankful that I was able to carry this project from just an idea into reality, and that everyone had so much fun in the process. I would not have been able to do this without the resources and commitment of the history department, who pushes us to learn outside our boundaries. So, over the years of learning about Roger Williams and colonial America, I have the history department to thank for inspiring me and pushing me to work harder to learn history in new ways, even as I move towards graduation and beyond.
I feel like on the theme of Plymouth.
Yeah, no, it segues rather beautifully into what I'm going to talk about, but it means I need to follow that up, so, right. So, I'm Dan Perkins. If you had met me this summer, I would have introduced myself as Clement Briggs, because I was working in the English Village as a first-person interpreter. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So, what happened was, through some wonderful networking here at the school, I was able to get an internship at Plymouth Plantation in their education department. Now, Professor Carrington Farmer mentioned that I'm a double major, secondary education and history, and it was really great to get into an educational space, because not only was I researching, because learned a lot about Boston, not all that much about Plymouth going into the internship, but researching a lot about Plymouth Plantation and finding great sources and great stories, but also working on lesson plans that could be brought out to schools for one-day activities through the education department. So I really wonderfully got to deal with both of my majors in that internship and make a lot of great connections, which led into the next summer when I showed back up as a pilgrim. Which brings to the fore a very interesting note on learning history. So learning history can be great broad strokes about everything that's happened and grand battles and generals and the like. But when you're suddenly thrust into bringing a person who we knew existed to life and not having, oh yes, you were born upon this date and you went to the battle and gave mighty orders to the whole army and you gave speeches that lets you know exactly what you believed, it's really, really intriguing to look back and responsibly portray someone who we're not certain how he felt about this or how he felt about that, but we do know how others who are like him did. And so I've got a very brief anecdote that kind of touches on all of this. Clement Briggs came from a part of London in Suffolk called Bermondsey Street. And Bermondsey Street had a parish, and that parish was very Puritan. The fun thing about the early modern New England colonies was you have people from the Church of England who are like, yep, we're cool, Church of England's great, I'm on board with it. You've got people in the Puritan group who are like, the Church of England is sinking and we need to fix it. And then you've got the separatists, who are everyone else in the village, who are like, the Church of England is sinking, we need to get on a raft and get the heck out of here. So there were many wonderful debates about theology that broke out in Plymouth Plantation. And a conversation I had with another person as I was running by kind of debate topics with someone who knew far more about the religion than I did, because I didn't want to just go, ha-ha, this is the debate topic I'm taking, and realize that it's completely off the wall, was I had come up with a couple of different points and I was talking to them and he went, you know, I always love this when you're actually using the logic that they used. And he started giving me a lot of primary sources to back up what I was saying these people were saying what you're saying, so this is how you can say it. And so it's really finding the little things in history that make you realize these are what these people were seeing, which, wonderfully enough, I was well scaffolded into stepping into. Because at Roger Williams, and actually under the direction of Carrington Farmer, there is an activity here called Reacting to the Past, which is integrated into classroom settings. And essentially what it is taking on the role of a first person in an event. The specific event that I'm usually involved in is the trial of Anne Hutchinson. And what happens is you all take on a role. I was Governor John Winthrop, screaming about how you can't slander me and sending people to prison, but side points. Essentially what you do is you take on a role and you play throughout this event. The event in specific being Anne Hutchinson going, "Ha, I don't like your religion," and us going, "Ha, we don't like you." So what was really intriguing from that is learning all of these small things. And what I think really brings to the forefront is it brings, let me step back a moment. That was in a class called Core 102, which is done with the history majors who just came in, but also a lot of people who don't know history. And what I think it really, really highlights is that to the people involved, these aren't irrefutable, this has to happen, and yes, clear broad strokes of I can see where we're going and I see where we begin. You start seeing that you can't really understand history in a, oh yeah, well, that was bound to happen because it did. You need to understand that to the people playing and acting and making these events happen, they're suddenly going, how's this going to turn out? If I do this, is something bad going to happen? And really understand the people involved instead of just understanding big, broad strokes, which of course you do need to understand. I'm not advocating throw all that out, but it really makes history more personal and far more understandable. Which means I get to segue into something completely different. The other things I've done with Professor Carrington Farmer goes back to talking about the graphic design. So I jump over a little bit, but there is a thin byline to connect it. So follow me this one. This project that I got to do with the graphic design was to help inform a mural for a brewery called 12 Guns, which is in reference to the 12-gun sloop of war captained by John Paul Jones and others throughout the American Revolutionary War. Not the frigate that was captured by the English, but the one that was scuttled and the English didn't get. I say that because we had a couple of conversations about which Providence it was. So, what happened is I went through and I found a couple of different sources. We found blueprints for a re-updated version of the Providence that they wanted to use as a background, and then we didn't use, so that's hours of research that disappeared. But what happened in the end was a mural was designed. And it was all wonderful, everything seemed to be making sense, and then it was, once again, the little things that I hadn't even considered of that played a huge part in understanding the history. The graphic designer did a really, really good job. The ship was all right. The crewmen looked pretty much like they would. And then the gun they had was on a siege cannon trestle, which, if you don't care super much about maritime history, wouldn't raise any alarms. But a siege gun is for land-based operations, and very specific. A naval gun carriage is entirely different. And I realized that in me talking about all of the, yes, he sailed up here and they bombarded the forts and then he came down here and stopped the frigate from getting the brigantine, I had completely skipped over all of the very small personal things that brought the history to life. And so luckily I was able to go, oh crap, let me just real quick step in here and show them what a naval gun carriage was. But throughout all of my time at Roger Williams, it's really highlighted that the broad strokes, while necessary, are kept up by the very small things, the material culture and the people who involved themselves in the events that happened, and not to forget all of the voices that sometimes get lost in the background of this noble general sent hundreds of men off in the field, which is essentially everything I said. And I think I came under the 5 minutes, but I stopped paying attention to the watch.
So we had certainly, last but not least, Sam Strock, who's going to talk to us about her experiences within the history department.
Yeah. So, hi everyone, my name is Sam Durosha. Like Professor Carrington Farmer had said before, I'm a legal studies and history double major, which is good for me because when people pose the question that Rebecca brought before, what are you going to do with your history degree? It's really easy for me to answer. I just say I'm going to throw 3 more years and a couple $100,000 into my education at law school, get a degree and become an attorney. It's also why my speech is not going to be nearly as theatrical as Dan's. So, because I want to be an attorney. So. Here at Roger Williams, I've worked in the history department on a lot of projects and quite a few through the CPC program. This semester is actually my 3rd, and I'm also a Hassenfeld Fellow, so I'm pretty involved there. But I'm going to just talk to you about those today and then segue into something else a little bit later. But one of my personal favorite ones came through that Facing East class that Professor Carrington Farmer had talked about before, except it was a different project. So the one that was mentioned before was the class before I got here, but the one
in my class that we worked on was actually a land rights case. So during that class, we were approached by, or we were presented with a case involving the Narragansett tribe in Rhode Island and an outside company who were in litigation over the issue of land rights. During this project, our class was split into groups. I obviously took on the historical context and legal evidence group, because why wouldn't I? My job was to look for historical evidence and also case law, legal things, loopholes, things of that nature. My group in particular partnered with former Attorney General Arlene Violet, which was incredible as somebody who is both a history and a legal studies major. She's pretty famous for what she does. She's incredible. And our job was to turn anything we could find over to her. So the project very quickly became a really excellent learning experience, especially for someone like me, because legal studies and history were very clearly brought together. Like I said, it had merged my two majors and gave me hands-on experience in both, which looks amazing on a resume. And the project also presented a number of unique questions that I wouldn't have gotten in either major. So one of the main issues we had was, what can we use as evidence in a courtroom? Because a lot of the history majors were thinking, all right, let's just get everything and we'll throw it in. But as a legal studies major, I know that a lot of things can't get into court, and a lot of things involved hearsay, which, for those who don't know, you can't bring out-of-court statements into a courtroom, which was a problem because our entire basis was based on oral history, which is not good. So we worked with her to kind of get around those. Also, it allowed me to work with an amazing expert in the field. She's like a star attorney, Arlene Violet. And working with her was such an amazing experience for somebody who wants to become an attorney and wants to become an attorney in Rhode Island, more specifically. Additionally, along with this project, I also worked my freshman year on a project through my Dimensions of History class, which was also taught by Professor Carrington Farmer.
Well, the do teach here.
Yes, they do, and I promise I take classes with them sometimes. But this project was my second semester freshman year. And the class itself, Dimensions of History, focused on how do we learn history, how do we write about history, how do we study history. So let's put history as a genre and learning about specific events to the side. Let's talk about how historians work. So we partnered up with individuals at the Bristol Historical Society, and they wanted a project where the groups of students would find evidence on the Civil War soldier Ambrose Burnside, who was also a Bristol resident. So everyone kind of picked their own projects. You could work in teams. I chose to work alone, and I looked at his political career in Rhode Island, which is not a well-known thing. So the project, especially for an incoming freshman, presented a form of research that could never be replicated in a classroom. I found myself in archives and libraries. I found myself doing research on every part of the internet you could imagine. It also required finding research that didn't really exist as much as it probably could have. I think I found one book and a lot of primary sources, so I couldn't rely on secondary sources the way I did, especially in high school. And most shockingly, and the biggest research that happened was we were forced to research a topic that didn't have an answer. So I had written papers in high school, I've written theses in high school, I chose my topics in high school, but with all of those papers, there was almost a guarantee that there was some answer out there. There was something in the textbook I could use, there was some conclusion I could pretty easily make, and it would be fine. But this project, there really wasn't. So I went in there researching things, and I did not know what I was going to get until I was researching. And as a freshman, that's a pretty big thing to learn. It launched me into the real world of historical research, where you don't really know what you're looking for until you start looking. This semester, my final CPC project, I'm in an animal studies and deep ecology class, which is taught through the history department. And in this class, we look at the ethics, we look at the animal rights movement, the principles and the goals of the ecological movement, things of that nature. But one of the things we have to study is animals, and how do we talk about them, how do we incorporate them into history when we can't get their histories from them, if that makes sense. I can't go and interview a dog and get a straight answer. But one of the best ways we're being kind of forced to learn how to do that is through Winslow Farms. So our class will be going up to Winslow Farm in November and working with the animals hands-on. Each of them, Winslow Farms, for those who don't know, is a farm that takes on animals that wouldn't necessarily have a home. Some of them were abused, some of their owners passed away or moved away, so they take in essentially homeless animals. Each of them have a backstory, each of them have a personality, and this CBC project is going to allow us to work with them hands-on and learn those stories to be able to write them. In addition to the CBC projects, the history department has also hosted a number of events here, and the one I'm going to be talking about in particular is that Reading Roger event that was brought up before. So it's happened twice so far. And during this event, as Professor Harrington had said, Julie Fisher came in and she was helping us. First it was a paleography competition, and then it was the artifacts and everything after. So the first thing we did was that competition where we were given a scan of a Roger Williams letter in his handwriting, and our job was to try to transcribe it in not a lot of time, which for me was a little bit easier, but for those poor incoming freshmen who hadn't, handwriting in and of itself is inherently difficult to read. Now add in the fact that spelling wasn't standardized, good luck. But it was obviously a challenge to most of us here. And a lot of us who, before coming to Roger in high school, had been given nice, neatly typed, transcribed sources. Like the worst we had was maybe the spelling was a little off, and that got thrown out the window. You were going to be forced to read handwriting now. And it was also important because there's a lot of context that you can get in those documents when you see the handwritten ones that you wouldn't be able to get through a transcription. And Julie Fisher actually did a little section where she showed us just the letter, just the words "I love you" on a blank piece of paper. And then she was like, well, what context do you get when you see it here? And it was like written in crayon with like little stick figure family on the bottom. And then, okay, well, what do you see when it's here? And it's like magazine cutouts, and it's like really sketchily put down. And both of those have a very different meaning, but you wouldn't be able to know that if you just looked at the transcription. So that was important. And then after the event, we were able to practice writing with acrylic ink. We saw artifacts and folded letters. And the event was helpful in showing students the greater picture that artifacts and these hands-on activities make, and they can't be replicated in a classroom the way that they were there. Overall, my experiences with experiential learning here at Roger have been nothing but helpful. Because of our work with so many groups, my classmates and I have a unique advantage when it comes to peers who have not been offered these kinds of opportunities. I know personally, I have a lot of friends from high school that went on to be history teachers, but went to different colleges that focused a lot more on the educational aspect. So they're great at making lesson plans, but they never did any of this. So it's going to be very difficult if they do want to go on to be historians, because they never got the stuff that we got. Each event, project, workshop, etc. has helped to expand my own knowledge and added to my resume of accomplishments. So many of these projects related directly to my goal of being an attorney, so it made it onto my resume. And as a result of this, I personally believe experiential learning is an important part of the study of history. Thank you.